Thank God that wasn't captured on the internet. My name's Donal. I'm the Director of Programs for the LDG. Welcome to this evening and presentation of ONYX. I want to just a couple of bits of housekeeping. If you haven't been here before, there's toilets just outside the kitchen. We're going to break somewhere around 8:20 or so for 15-20 minutes. If there's a fire or anything like that, straight back out the way you came in. But without further ado, let's dive in. I just want to apologise for Le Guin not being here on account of he has food poisoning. But the good news is we
eat that damn salad.
we are replete with other members of ONYX, starting with Trey,
yes,
who is the Vice President of the Northwest chapter. We have Daddy Rod, who is the National Treasurer.
Hi, everybody.
Based in Atlanta, but originally from the Bay Area. We have Graylin, who I'm sure you all have had. I mean, no. who is the road captain. And we have Jack, who is the Secretary of the Northwest chapter. So I'm going to pretty much let them tell you the story of ONYX from the early days to now and where they are in the Northwest chapter. And if at any point, because I probably know about as much as you guys, I feel like they've left out some vital bit, I'll jump in. Or if I've got any questions, I may do that. You're happy for them to raise a hand and ask questions as we go along, and then right at the end we'll do some Q&A as well at the end. So, Daddy Rod, over to you.
Again, thank you all for having us again here. Really appreciate it. For myself, I was here roughly 5 years ago when Patrick was programmed, and Mufasa was one of our founders. We came out here to talk about ONYX and people of color in the leather community. And in a way, this birthed ONYX Northwest. So I am so happy. Again? Birthed. But no, seriously, it did, because for a lot of people in the Bay Area, for those who went to like maybe MAL or IML, they knew about ONYX because of the dance. But there was no ONYX presence in the Bay Area or California as a whole. So literally my mission, since I'm from San Jose, was to establish chapters of ONYX in California. So the first one was Southwest, which is based in Los Angeles, which was formalized in 2015, and then just past October, Northwest became formalized. So I'm very, very happy. And yeah, you can go ahead. You can go ahead. Oh, Danny, baby. Come on, baby. Come on, Danny. Come on, Danny.
Who am I going to sit on?
You can sit on my lap. Come on,
Anyone
Danny.
you want.
Come on, Danny.
There was 6 chairs up here.
In the death cell.
Is there another sit over there, and I'll go back to each other.
But just to give you a little brief history of ONYX, ONYX started in Chicago in 1995 by 5 African American men who pretty much saw that there was technically not a safe space for men of color in the leather community, where a lot of other leather organizations weren't actively recruiting people of color. And so it was Mufasa, Stephen, Nate, what was that, remember? I don't even know my history, that's a shame. Stephen, Nate, and Wes. And actually Nate lives here in Oakland now. But initially started in Chicago. Then we grew to Southeast, where I'm located right now, which is in Atlanta. And then from like 1995 through 2005, we had roughly 4 chapters, which is after Atlanta, Southeast, we had East, in New York. Then DC, Mid-Atlantic. So for a while when we had 4, then roughly after that we just exploded. So now we have a total of 9 chapters throughout the nation, which include Deep South, which is in Fort Lauderdale, Lone Star, which is based in Dallas, and Southwest in Los Angeles, Great Lakes, which is based in Detroit and Cleveland, and of course Northwest, which is based here in San Francisco. And before I get started, continue on, Danny was also one of our members of ONYX Northwest, so welcome Danny. Thank you so much for coming.
Sorry, she had to work in Modesto, so
But you're here, you're safe. Thank you so much for being here. So technically, just give you a little brief, also a brief history of ONYX Northwest. Even though the official started here in this building, in this particular meeting, I initially reached out to Lance back in 2010 when he just won Mr. San Francisco Leather. But then he got really swamped, and then he ran for IML, and we all know he came in first runner-up. He said, babe, I ain't got no time. So I was like, okay, that's fine, no problem. So it kind of really got put on the back burner. So then when Patrick at the time, I don't know how he found me, but he found me, and he said, we want ONYX to come out here to speak to the San Francisco Leathermen's discussion group. So he wanted one of the founders, so I got Mufasa, he got us out here, and this is pretty much how everything got started. And then for like roughly 3 years, I had meet and greet during Folsom Street, Door Alley, just to get a kind of pulse of who would be interested, and this is how I met him. I think it's funny here. It's funny how I admired him back in. This is the old day before the internet for all y'all youngsters. So I would go to the San Jose Public Library and look at the Advocate magazine to go to the back and look at the classifieds. I'm like, who is this black man on here? This was the time when you Mr. Drunk, and I was just like, oh my God. So fast forward 10 years, 20 years after that.
And now he's like, whatever.
I know. I'm like, girl, please. But when we started having the meet and greets and Graylin came out, it was just such a pleasure to meet him. I was like, oh my God, I'm meeting him, oh my gosh. And then I met Trey. Seriously, it was like that. It was like, oh my gosh. And then I met Trey. Then I met Jack. Then also I met LeGuan, which is funny, I met LeGuan at his first Folsom Street in 2015 when he was getting flogged by somebody. And then I met Master Matt Steven, I met Danny, I met Darius, and who else did I miss out on? I think that's it.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. So after that, when I saw the core group who came to all the meet and greets, because technically you start a chapter once, you need at least 6 or 7 people of color, men of color, to get a chapter started. Because they are technically going to be your first executive body. So once we got all of them together, and I said, y'all want to be a part of this? They said, yeah, let's do this. So this is where we're at right now, and I'm just so happy. Technically, with me not living here, I'm not in the day-to-day decision making, but I do kind of mentor them, since I am like the founding father of this chapter. So if they have any problems, like, Daddy Rob, we need your help. So I'm here to answer their questions, and I will kind of defer to them to come out and talk about maybe the leather journey and how they got into ONYX or introduced to ONYX and what they're doing here in the Bay Area. So I'll start with our VP.
I'm Trey. Like you said, I'm the Vice President of the Northwest chapter. So I started my leather journey actually in Virginia with the ONYX of Virginia. And from there it kind of just exploded. I went through, it was an interesting thing just to go through with the Nighthawks of Virginia. It was like I was the only person of color, so it was very interesting. I didn't always feel like I belonged. So I ended up a couple years later going to MAL, and I ended up seeing our founder, pretty much, Mufasa, and he's like beating this guy, and I was like, this is where I belong. I was like, oh God, okay, this is where I need to be. So, and it was like dark and like all like mysterious. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I was like, okay, so like, who's ONYX? Like, what is this? And then Daddy Rod, I heard about them putting out the meet and greets for ONYX or whatnot. And I ended up going. I kept going for like 3 years. Yeah. and then here I am now. So. Yeah.
Graylin.
Well, most of y'all know me, so. But as far as ONYX is concerned, back in '96-7, I was editor of a magazine called GBM that was being put out by Brush Creek Media. I don't think Bear Dog is in the room, is he? No? Okay. Bear Dog was my boss, all of you who know Bear Dog. And as part of that magazine, I interviewed Mufasa. Did a telephone interview because we didn't have, the whole internet thing happening yet. So I interviewed him, and then at the end of the interview, I was like, well, what about us in San Francisco? And at the time, he felt that he didn't want to grow that fast, Plus, he really didn't feel like we needed it in San Francisco then. Yes, he did. He said that.
Yes. We'll talk to you later, Mufasa.
99, I'm gonna say 97.
Okay.
Mufasa wanted to concentrate on his part of the country, which is that side. The
Midwest.
well, okay, anything not California, which is that side of the country. That's right. And I'm gonna say one of the reasons that he wanted to start there and not here is because here we actually did have some people of color who were leaders in this community. We had Mr. Marcus, who I'm sure all of you remember very fondly, and Vern Stewart, who is now on the East Coast. And we had Queen Cougar. So we had people here to look up to. But as time started going on, those people, including myself, started getting older and tired and worn out. So it's really good to have new, young people of color coming up, so that the rest of us can now take a break and sit down and rock in our chair. And that's my so, moving on. And I do that though. They'll tell you I'm the guy who sits back going, no, you don't want to do that. So that's kind of my role.
Jack, will you go next, please?
Sure. So Jack, hi. I mean, my leather journey started a long time ago, but I feel like a similar theme that you hear in a lot of these stories is that like you just didn't feel like you belonged in a lot of spaces, and I think all of us can feel that way at a certain point or another. And I noticed that going to a lot of events, like I grew up in the Bay, so I've been coming to Leather and King events for a long time, probably before I was supposed to. And there was always like a core little group of like, black folks in the corner being like, yeah, we're all here, and we're like the 5 of us that are at this event, and we're just gonna sit here and talk to each other. And I just felt like there should be more than that. And I didn't hear about ONYX until about 2 years ago. And when I heard about it, it was when I met Daddy Rod at a Powerhouse event, and I was like, yeah, I'm trying to bring this club out here, and I was like, that would be amazing. Like, I really want to get involved. And so I just kind of hounded him for 2 years, being like, so when's this going to happen? And then whenever it was like, oh, well, this other person's going to get involved, I'd find them and be like, so when's this going to happen? And I just consistently was like trying to make it happen. And finally, where I was like, we're actually going to do this like a year ago, and it all came together, and I could not be happier.
Danny, sir.
I started exploring leather proper. Even though I knew I was a pervert since I was a kid, long before I knew I was gay. I started exploring leather when I was in graduate school in Indiana, which is the Ku Klux Klan state in all of American history, if you didn't know that. It was only like 50 years ago that the the governor was also a Klansman, so. And I'm not talking about Mike Pence. I sought out Indiana because I was really interested in putting myself in a place like that. I grew up here in the Bay Area, I was always really involved in like social justice work from like as a queer youth and the POC movement. Tiger Yoshi. Many of you guys know, big bondage guy. He became like a brother to me, and as I developed, I kept like getting asked to take on leadership roles or like run for titles and stuff, or join different clubs, and I was never interested in that simply because I was like, I got into leather because by way of the punk community, and in punk rock, like, there are no rock stars, there are only anti-heroes, so you do your best work when you're closest to the ground. And so I was more interested in mentoring and building community for myself with other younger men of color, or particularly like Asian and Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian folks. And so I was, a lot of the kind of leadership roles that I started taking was more interpersonal rather than institutional, because I've always been suspicious of institutions. So, but then I somehow got shanghaied by this guy to start up ONYX, and it was simply because I accepted, if not simply because I at least believed in the heart and the mission of the organization. So I think I ended up here by accident. by sheer charisma and uniqueness, nerve, and talent.
So you mentioned the heart and the mission, and unless that happened while I was getting the chair, could you speak to that, and especially, like, I don't know if it's changed over since ONYX was born?
No.
Or no? Okay, then just.
The mission of ONYX, again, was to initially create a safe space for people of color, men of color, because as you've heard from a lot of the stories from my brothers here, whether we went to a leather event or a bar or whatever, we would be the only person of color in the room. And most times, we weren't even approached in a very congenial way, like, hey, welcome to our event, thanks for being here. Most times, and I'll speak for myself, was to be someone's sexual chocolate fantasy. So at first I was like, you know what, it's all good, I don't want to be bothered, so I would stay to myself. So that was the initial purpose of ONYX, and also at the time when ONYX started in '95, this was during the I wouldn't say the peak of HIV/AIDS virus, but it was like really all in the news, all the funding was going out to all these different organizations, and it was going to the broader gay and lesbian community, but it wasn't touching people of color organizations. So those funds technically weren't hitting our people. So ONYX made it a point whenever we go to leather events or have bar nights, any monies we raise at bar nights or events will go fund organizations that touch people of color, whether it be Black, Latino, Asian, whatever, because those monies, let's say for instance, that were raised by HRC or whatever, it wasn't trickling down to our neighborhoods. So that was the main vision and mission of ONYX. And again, I guess the perception is sometimes, for some people, when ONYX started, it was predominantly Black men. So most people thought it was just a Black organization. But if you specifically say, if you read the mission statement, it's men of color. Now, we'll have another discussion how some men of color don't think they're of color. Well, that's another discussion all in itself. But, yeah, we'll leave that alone. But it was open to everybody, and that's why it was, for me personally, it was very important for me to start chapters in California. Because even though we have chapters in DC, Chicago, New York, which are very diverse, it's also very segregated. If anyone's been to Chicago, New York, DC, it's very segregated. So you did have people, the Black stayed here, the white stayed there, the Asian stayed here. In the Bay Area, we kind of all lumped together in California in general. So for me, starting chapters out here was just my mission. I will not lie to you. The brothers of every chapter will tell you that. So that's why I say I am the father of these chapters, and I'm proud to say it. But, and it shows though, if you look at even our ONYX Southwest chapter, any of their flyers, it features all men of color. So you have Asian, Latino, Black, Pacific Islander, chubs, twinks, everything, because that's a representation of our community. So people see like, oh my, so for instance, if, like I'm even not on the apps anymore, there's a lot of cycles on there. But last time I was on Jack, I had this Asian guy hit me up and say, well, is ONYX open to Asian men? I was like, of course it is. And then they saw a flyer with Danny on it. It's like, oh, I feel now more welcome to come. Because again, image is everything. So you can go to, I can't tell you how many IML photos, posters and claws. And this is not knocking white men, because I love seeing some beautiful people of all colors, but you hardly see any Blacks, any Latinos, any Asians. So it's like, where do I fit in? So ONYX having our, whether it be either a dance or a cocktail party or whatever, that's like, hey, you are welcome. And also our big thing is, being inclusive. Just to let you all know, because people's like, because I've had, white guys say to me, well, y'all just a racist organization. And I'm like, well, so I had to get myself together. And so, perfect example, and he's no longer with this organization, well, I won't call him out, but a particular club in the DC area that I said, well, are you active, huh?
I said enough said.
Yeah. So I said, are you actively recruiting other men of color? Because I'm not seeing it in your body. Crickets. So I was like, see, this is why we have ONYX. So I was like, hey, maybe, even if all organizations did actively recruit men of color or women of color too, I think you would still have an organization for just people of color, just like you have organizations for women. Because we all just have different things that we can discuss. Like for instance, with all the stuff going on with black people, with the Starbucks thing, and then what happened at the Waffle House and everything else, I love my white brothers and sisters, but there's just some stuff that you will not be able to relate to me with. So, but if I'm with like Raylan and Trey and Jack, we're like, child, this happened to me 2 weeks ago. You know what I'm saying? So it's just, it's not like we don't want you there, but it's like sometimes we just need our space just to just come to ourselves and talk amongst ourselves. So that, and hopefully that answered your question about the mission of ONYX and stuff. So.
And you've slightly spoken to the other thing I was going to ask, which is around your strategy. So part of it is obviously creating meet and greets,
oh, yes.
you know, and other things. You have one of the most popular parties at IML. How did that happen?
Yeah, and too. So to give you a little history, IML dance initially started, I think, about 15, 20 years ago. Initially started off in a small ballroom. You know, I think at the time, Mufasa reached out to Chuck Winslow, rest in peace, Chuck. And Chuck was a very strong advocate of ONYX. He said, why not? Go ahead. And you never know if a party's going to succeed or not, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, we have a kind of music that we like to hear, some R&B, some deep house or whatever. So we started playing the music. We had some drag performers doing their drag thing, and it just became this huge party. And then year after year, that was just a party to go to. Now, unfortunately, due to the fact that they moved to the Congress, and, sorry about that, IML. They're not at the Hyatt anymore.
They know it.
Yeah, yeah. Because when it was at the main hotel, I mean, we would have an influx of people coming to our party. Now that we're in a smaller space, we unfortunately have to take it outside the venue. But people still do show up, though. But yeah, it just became very popular. And just like, for instance, for those who go to MAL, when we have our, initially it started off as a small little cocktail party with the ONYX Punch, and a one room developed, this was back at the time, was at the Washington Court, Washington Square, and it became so popular that people were literally in the hallways, which caused a fire issue. So they had to move us into a little small ballroom, and then we outgrew the ballroom. So then after that, then kudos to my ONYX Mid-Atlantic brothers, they said, let's party with a purpose. So that's when we started doing the cocktail and gear auction. So we reach out to all the vendors of all the leather establishments to to donate some goods, and we would fashion it off. And all the money that's auctioned off from these items that were donated will go to an organization that would help either people of color or our youth. And we've been doing that now for the last 5 years now. And each year successively, like this past year, we raised almost $8,000 for our organization at MAF. And then just past year, well, actually just last week, we had our first dance at Emerson. So it's just like, it's a great thing. It's a great thing. So, and who would have thought, and I can't speak for Mufasa, because I've been in an organization now going on, what's this, 2019? 18? So 15 years. So ONYX is now 23 years old. So we've had a lot of organizations that have, unfortunately have folded. And we're continually growing. And I tell people all the time, the internet has been our best friend. Because when we promote our stuff out there, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, people, it's like a perfect storm, because now we have a lot of men of color, especially, and I can only speak for more African American, who are finally getting in tune with their sexuality. And then when you get in tune with your sexuality, then you find out you're kinky. So then it's like, oh my God, I'm gay, I'm bi, I'm kinky too. And it's like, ooh, what's honest? And they're beating you, they're pissing on you, and they're doing whatever, and yes, I'm home. So it all worked out. So it's just like a perfect storm for ONYX. And, I told you, we're kind of going through a growing pains right now, but it's a good growing pains. And we just, our thing is, and I speak for myself, why I'm so active, and I love just the networking. Anyone who knows me, I'm a networker. I like to just reach out and touch people, and especially the women in our community, because ONYX, we really value the women in our community. So that's why we have an offshoot called ONYX Pearls. We have 4 chapters now: Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, DC, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, Deep South, which is Fort Lauderdale. We're starting Pacific Northwest. So, honestly, it's just my heart. I love it. You know, and I tell people all the time, anyone can join ONYX. I tell people it's like the full brothers, full membership goes to men of color, gay, bisexual, trans men of color, and anyone else can be an associate member. So, Jeff, you'll be an associate member. Yes, we'll work it out, honey. We're working it out. But anyone can be an associate member. So you can be a member of ONYX if you want to become a member of ONYX. And if you don't want to become a member of ONYX, you can join the ONYX Pearls. So we are open to everybody. We don't segregate, you know, we don't do all this kind of nasty shit. We're not about that. We're all about being inclusive. So, you know, I don't want to keep talking. So,
you're welcome to, but I was going to sort of, as you were coming to a natural end, you talked about seeing posters where there could maybe be more representation. And, you know, I can speak to having been involved in photo shoots from a lot of different, you know, angles. And very often, whatever role you're playing in a photo shoot, you've got so many variables to deal with that trying to keep your eye on that can be you know, one more challenge too far. But I also think that if everybody on the photo shoot is keeping an eye on that, then it becomes a lot easier. So I think a lot of people maybe don't think they're necessarily in a position to support the work that you're doing and the you know, the efforts you're making to make the wider community more welcoming to people of colour. Are there things that, you know, obvious things that spring to mind that you can suggest?
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think one of the things that's important to remember is that people of color don't want to be rescued by non-people of color.
Right.
You know, what we want and need is space, time to ourselves to congregate amongst ourselves. And that becomes very important, especially in the Black community, because I know Black kids get it, when I say kids, I mean 20-somethings,
Right.
get it from both sides. So when we're interested in BDSM or kink or anything outside of what the Black church tells us we should be interested in, we get it from the Black people saying, you can't do that, that's a white thing.
Right.
And then, you know, you go and you look at a poster, and sure enough, it's a white thing because there's no Black people on that poster. So it's so you get, you know, your community telling you that you don't belong, and then you don't think you belong because you don't see anyone else there. So, you know, like when Rodney said, we get accused of being anti-race, or what's it, reverse racism, and all of that. And we have to say, it's not that we don't want you there, it's that we want us there to commiserate and talk about our lives and the things that affect us.
Right.
And no matter how I explain it, you're never going to understand that. It's just impossible. You know, like, you'll never know what it's like to not have a country, to not know where your ancestors came from, to not hear stories of, you know, your grandfather being a fisherman, or these recipes were passed down from generation. You'll never know what that's like. We will know what that's like because we live with that every single day. So we need our own space, our own time together. And that's the biggest part of this for me. And that's what ONYX does for me.
And I think, go.
So I think you had asked, could you rephrase the question, because I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly.
Well, it's about things people wouldn't necessarily be mindful of.
Okay.
So, for example, you know, in a photo shoot scenario, as you're planning it would generally be one person's job to book the people that are going to be in front of camera, and with all the other things that that person has to think about, they might not keep their eye on the ball of diversity.
Sure.
But if collectively the people working on the thing, have an eye on that ball, then it will make it easier for that person to address that. I think there are probably other ways, as we live our lives, where we can be mindful of situations where we can make people of colour more welcome. For example, you described, going to parties where no one was even.
Yeah, they won't even speak.
Right.
They won't even speak.
So I was basically asking, do you have suggestions of things that people can?
Yeah. So what Graylin pointed out gets to, and correct me if I'm wrong. You pointed out issues of needing space in which you can find fellowship with people who share similar experiences with you, right? But the question, or what I'm hearing from the question is also, what can folks outside of people of color who are kinky do to help support? Is that what you're asking?
It's not necessarily outside of people of colour, but what can people do generally?
Yeah, so when you're asking, or when you're bringing up the example of the photo shoot thing, I think of issues of, there are whole comment threads that are happening on online communities right now on Facebook. There's like a leather people of color private Facebook group, in which case they're actually less. Gratitude to Mr. S here for hosting this event, but they literally post up every time a Mr. S newsletter comes out and goes I feel totally represented in this, and just showing it's just white person after white person after white person, and that's totally fine, except and I recognize the challenge. I've talked to the marketing team at Mr. S about this, which is they have trouble recruiting models of color for their thing. But it's also to recognize, if you are in a position of power, that there are systemic reasons why men of color are not jumping at the chance to model for you. There's a reason why you don't have a roster of models that you can pull from, and it's because systemically men of color have either been exoticized and therefore made to feel like a piece of meat in a way that's not positive, or been made to feel like a fetish. And so if the optics of that is at work, then the question becomes not how do I, or the question then becomes how do I, as a person who has the opportunity to run a photo shoot, cut through and recognize some of these systemic issues that are at play and are being internalized, to actually I don't know how to quite describe this, but do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, totally.
There's this issue of you have to recognize that the issue of recruitment is a lot more complicated than availability.
Yeah, I think I kind of get what you're saying. It's just it's once we get put on that poster, we're out there. It's we're basically we're gonna get all that hostility and stuff that we've already felt just standing there by yourself. You know what I mean? And it's automatically gonna be in your face, and you're man, and then it's just gonna keep rolling, and that's how we feel. We're in that space, and we're okay, people are staring at us. We're not, I'm being objectified constantly, and now I'm on this poster, and it's just gonna get worse, and it's just gonna be a constant thing that you're gonna have to deal with the whole time, So
I'm gonna give another example. Maybe this will actually be a little bit more concrete. And again, it actually involves Mr. S. But I do whipping scenes for Mr. S for Folsoms and Dory. And there's a photo of me beating up a boy that they posted on social media, and there were a lot of likes on it and a lot of reaction. And there was one black guy who commented saying, as a black man, this is disturbing to me. This is disgusting. And I watched as commenter after commentator posted going like, why do you have to make this about race? What are you even doing here? Like, it's like, this is consensual. And they started wailing, and they started going in on him. And like, I waited a day to see if anyone else that was not another black person or another brown person jumped to this guy's defense. And then finally the next day I commented, and I'm like going, I am the person in this photo. I'm doing this scene, and I completely validate this man's opinion of this because as a non-black person, I have to recognize that this is a triggering thing that I am into. And I make sure that every time I engage in a scene that involves an instrument that has the weight of this, of historical oppression, that I go into that scene negotiating that and communicating that with the person that I'm playing with, especially if they are another person of color. I make sure that every single person that I mentor as a whipper recognizes that this instrument that you're playing with is loaded, and you need to carry with you the responsibility of recognizing what that does for people who are watching. And then all the lights started coming in for that one, and they were mostly from people of color. And it was, but not only that, it was also for me, it was really important that not only that I put that out there and get support from it, but that Mr. S actually responded and liked it too, showing that they were backing up what I was saying, which was this guy who you guys are all saying is like making it about race. It's like, yeah, he is making it about race because it is relevant. And so I do not need, we don't need, so when it comes into like politics around the intersection of race and sexuality, I think, to answer your question more directly, I think the most important part is we don't need people to negate the situation. We need more people who are willing to lean into the hard conversation. We need more white people that actually say, I hear you, I am listening, I am trying to recognize and understand the experiences that you are going through, even though I cannot and never will actually know what it's like, because I never had the weight of that historical systemic oppression that exists in the United States of America to recognize what it means to be a person of color in this country. So, there. That's my answer to that question.
Well, so I've got one main sort of point of clarification. In the interest of understanding, were you unhappy that they posted the photo, or did you just feel that as you said, it was perfectly reasonable for the guy who said that thing to say that, yeah.
I was not unhappy about that photo being posted, because I thought it was hot.
I thought so too.
I felt hot. I was there. It was hot. The bottom that was there also thought it was hot. We were both really happy with that photo, and we looked fantastic. But you were asking, was I unhappy with the comments, or
No. I was checking that you didn't have an issue with the photo being posted.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and the person who commented, I already forgot his name, but black guy who commented saying like, this is disturbing to me. I didn't have a problem with him saying that, and I was like, I completely get it, dude. Like, I see you, I hear you. I'm the one who's doing this act, and I inadvertently, I know that I participated in doing something that's like psychologically triggering for you, and that's completely valid. And in fact, like, as your brother, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong for having that reaction. I'm going to say you are right to have that reaction. Go ahead and feel it. Go ahead and say it. And I want the rest of the world to say that it's okay to have that feeling too. Let's like dig into and learn why this is so true.
And that's another mission for Honest Education, because just with that photo, if I were to see, I don't know if I commented or not, but if I would have saw that comment from him, I would have private messaged him and said, because for a lot of black people that would trigger back to the slave days and everything else. because that's our reality. This is what happened with our ancestors. And if he's non-kink minded, he won't realize that this was a play scene, a fetish scene. So it's up to us, even if we're not even an ONYX member, but if we're a person of color who's even into that kind of play, we need to reach out to that person and say, let me talk to you in private. It's about, this is what's going on. This was a consent between two individuals. What's going on is visually from the front, you can say, oh my God, this is, because I can imagine if you whipped a black person, they'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. So, you know.
But that's also really important to recognize and be sensitive to the understanding that the optics of that changes, right? Like when you are playing with another black or brown person, depending on the type of scene, it can change the optics of what that can look like from an outsider perspective. Sorry.
No, that's fine. So that's another component, I mean, because we've had many workshops about race play, because you gotta understand for a lot of African Americans, I think you alluded to it, when people find out I'm into kink, first thing out of their mouth, you into that white boy shit. And I'm just like, oh, Lord have mercy. Let's take my tea and let's take it to a step back. Because I was like, no, it's not white boy shit. But see, they're going off the visual. Because they've seen the porn, they've seen the posters, and who was it back in the 80s and the 90s? It was mainly white people. Or black men, or Latino men who playing with only white men. So they assume, so then of course, if you see a black man, especially being the submissive to a white man, oh my God. It takes it back to roots, 12 years a slave, everything. And I'm just like, okay, we got to really just, let's go to Starbucks, not get called, and just, you know, at least call on us and have a discussion.
I've consistently, I perform. When I perform, I go with the people who are available, or I go with my partners who are going to do a demo with me or do a performance with me, and I have been taken aside by a number of different kinds of people consistently telling me that how can you be into this because of who you are as a person? I've had someone say you're setting the movement back. I'm gonna say mostly from white people. I've heard this, which is always funny to me. But and because I'm half white, and because I've heard a lot of these things, and because I didn't really meet a lot of other people of color that were into kink and leather until a little bit later in my journey, I didn't even think that I belonged in this group. Because I was like, I don't know if me being that, and me being anything, being half white, half black, being a person who is into kink, is this going to further this conversation that I'm going to have with people? Am I going to have to explain yes, there are a number of us who are into this. I'm sorry, it's not just your playground. And consistently having to validate that to other people, I don't have to validate that here. I don't have to validate what I'm into or the kind of performances I put on or what I do, but it's easier to have a group of people to have the conversation with me versus trying to have it by myself consistently.
I had the similar experience as well, because I ended up going to the Master Slave contest up in, I think it was in Sacramento. Yeah. And people were like, "How dare you be here? You support this Master Slave?" I'm like, it's okay. I'm not against it. I'm not for it. I'm not a slave personally or anything. I'm not, but I'm not against it either. But people were like, "How dare you go up here? You're not for black people." I'm like, I have literally nothing to do with any. I just like the contest. That's So and
my friend is in the
my friend is over here, and I it's cool, whatever, But I think a lot of people, they put a lot of pressure on just being of color and being in a space where slave mentality or slave actions are being taking place. And I think that it is important for us to just be like, hey, it's okay, as long as it's consensual, things are, what I mean, it's fine. But at the same time, I can see how it is very triggering for people who are outside of our community and whatnot. But it's just the understanding and being like, okay, I understand. I'm validate, like Danny said, just be like, yes, I know this is triggering. I know this is, it's it's a little hostile for a lot of black people, and that's okay, And we're not looking for the rescue to be like, oh, you know, like come save everybody or anything. We're just looking for, hey, cool, we know, we understand, we get it, all right, and that's it, you know.
Okay, I do have a question though for the folks who just responded, but it sounds like we've all been told at one point you're setting the movement back, you're setting your people back, right? I'm really curious about what those instances look like and why. Just because
I can tell you a good one.
yeah. and the reason why I'm interested in this is simply because I think in terms of when we're looking at the optics of kink, people, especially who are outside of the leather community or the kink community, tend to think of it as like, oh, it's degrading for the submissive, but it's uplifting for the dom. And of course, those of us who play around with power exchange, we know that that's not the case, right? It's, or at least outside of the scene. Outside of the scene, it's not the case. But when you add in like the whole racial dynamic, then we get into this whole messy politics where you're just thinking about like mixing in race with power exchange and like leaning into that, and then we like it gets equated with this idea of like heteronormative issues of like what is considered submissive and top. What's dom and sub versus top and bottom, and who has power and who's like being taken advantage of, and you add the race angle to it, and then yeah, it gets like this messy thing. And I'm more interested in like as a community like disrupting these dyads, like these dichotomies. Anyways,
Tell your story.
So,
tell your story.
all right.
I got one after.
So I was at this 6-day play party in Michigan on the Eastern Shore, however they describe it, called Inferno. And afterwards, I was collared, and I was collared as a slave. And while at Inferno, it didn't even occur to me what that might look to anyone not at Inferno. So when Inferno was over, I had my big collar on. My back was whipped by a guy named Albert, and anyone who knows Albert knows what a good whipping that was. So my back was all bloody. I had on a collar, and we go to the airport. And
With your shirt off?
no, I had on a t-shirt, but you can only put on a t-shirt because you don't want everything sticking together.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, it was definitely visible that something had cut me on the back. And so we get to the airport, and I didn't have the key. So I get up to the putting all my stuff through and all that, and the very nice black woman says to me, you need to take that off. You can't go through. And I had to say, but I don't have the key. And she said, who does? I said, my master. Break out, baby.
She was
Luckily, at the airport, they have bolt cutters there. So they made this big thing. They called me over. They called the guy to cut the collar off me. All there in front of me.
Were you in a private room when this was going on?
Oh no! This is right there, right there. And for a second I thought, okay, is this an educational moment? Can I just explain all of this to her? But I decided to keep my mouth shut because I knew there was nothing I could say to get her to understand why I had that collar on. There was nothing. There was no education. There was nothing there.
Yeah.
So I had to, get the collar cut off, done, get on the plane and be done with it. But, but her being a black lady, there was absolutely nothing I could do. Had she not been black, I might have had a response
That's
for
not
her.
necessarily true.
She might have been.
She could have been at least somewhat receptive. You'd be surprised now. Trust me, I had my story in there for too now. But that's another topic.
I mean,
before that, wow. And before I tell my little story, I feel like, because I've gotten a lot of questions around, like, because I'm a sub and I'm collared, but I get a lot of people within the community telling me that I should not be doing that based on my race alone. So and for a group of people who have all had to come out to themselves about things that they're into, that the greater communities in general tell you shouldn't be into, we are very opinionated about what everyone else is into. So, you know, like, I'm never one to judge anyone, even if it's not my thing. I'm like, go for it. That's what you want to do it, because I don't want you telling me the same thing.
Right.
That being said, so I've for 10 years performed with a drag troupe, and one of my original pieces that I did was an anger management piece that I do to the song "Animal I Have Become" by 3 Days Grace. So I have two big long chains attached to my collar, and I have two people usually in either leather or like gear, like to hold me back, and I'm like not even in the same headspace. Like before I found someone who was really into actually getting that out of me in a like specifically kink space, this was my outlet. To be able to be in like a wolfy headspace and like get held back, and someone comes out during the number and like, you know, very therapeutically, you know, hits me with a riding crop and like kicks me a bit, and I'm like trying to attack the audience, and it's very therapeutic for me. I had somebody get a hold of a friend of mine, said, oh, this person has seen your performance and wants to interview you for their thesis about drag. I said, great, that sounds awesome. I'm always down to talk about these situations. And what apparently happened was this friend of a friend lied to them, was not doing their thesis on this topic, and got a hold of me, and I'm ready to like have a sit-down conversation about drag, and they're telling me that I should not be bringing race play onto a stage. As someone who is a person of color being hit by a white person, I should be ashamed of myself, and I should not be bringing that to the public. As a man of color, I should not be into that in the first place because of the history of like what people have gone through. And I'm sitting here just like, do I even know you? Like, who are you? Like, what? Have you seen the numbers? Like, I came and I saw this one number and then I left. And I'm like, okay, well, one, art is subjective. If that's how your opinion was, you could have just walked out and we already had your money. I don't really care what you have to say about it. Like, this is what I'm gonna be doing. Like, so, and everyone else loved it. Also, if that's what you took away from it, where's your head at?
Yeah,
like, what are you thinking about? Like, this seems to be your problem, not mine. I sat back, and I had to really think about what they were saying, and I was quiet for a minute. I was like, "Can I ask you a question?" She's like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Are you white?" And they're like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Okay. How old are you?" They're like, 22. I'm like, "Okay." Do you go to Cal? They're like, yes. And I'm like, this is why you have a problem with what I did. Like, are you taking women's studies right now and you're really into your situation? Like, yes. I'm like, okay, we're gonna have a different conversation now. Like, because if you are into this, if you are living in the Bay Area, especially, if you are going to gay clubs, if you are going to see drag, you're gonna see a lot of things that you might not be comfortable with. And you have to be okay with walking away and not putting that on somebody else. Like, if you had a problem with this, never go out to any leather club I'm ever in, because you will see way worse in private than you will see. And I don't usually stand up for myself very well, and if people come at me, I don't usually have the words in the moment to talk about me and my personal experience. But in this, I didn't know what else to say except to just go off on them. And
you did a fabulous job.
Thank you. And ever since then, when someone has come at me about something like that, I go back to that, because nothing for me, like many situations for me, aren't going to be worse than that, because that was the first time someone really came at me for it. And ever since then, I felt stronger about and wanted to go harder on that number and in my private life than I ever did before, because there's some level of like, I'm getting back at this person for not understanding and not just walking away and keeping their mouth, keeping their things themselves.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break now. We'll try and keep it short because we've clearly got a lot more to say. If you guys can come back for 8:45, that would be awesome.
Your eyes are up there.
Hi everybody, welcome back. Thank you for making it a short break so that we can come back and get back to talking about ONYX. So I want to say thank you to each and every person that is here tonight. We greatly appreciate that you're here. If you have not been here before, a little bit about Leathermen's Discussion Group. We have been going consistently since 1996. And we want to say thank you so much for the community support, for each of your support, because really we couldn't do it without you. There are always a lot of people involved in this each and every week. The board says thank you, but more importantly, we're an all-volunteer organization. So I want to acknowledge the people that helped to make tonight's program possible. So, and please stand up as I call your names so that we can all say thank you. Al, Daddy Blade, Daddy Robert, Huggy Bear, Craig, Wes, Jack, Tina Beachy, Trudy, Jeff, Master Hines, Chuck, and James. Thank you so much. If you want to find out more information about LDG and the things that we're doing, certainly we're going to talk about some of our upcoming programs, but we are very, very involved on Facebook. Please find us on Facebook. We try to live stream as many programs as we can so that we can see the content both here in the Bay Area and then around the world. Check out more on SFLDG.org. If you're also looking for information about education for men under the age of 40, kind of more younger men, people that may not know as many things, trying to learn and grow experiences, there's the Young Leathermen's Discussion Group, or SFYLDG.org, to find out more information there. And
That's discriminatory.
just look at my ass. Just look at my ass.
Okay.
So again, thank you so much. We have a lot of things coming up. It's going to be a very busy summer, as it always here is in San Francisco. But we thank you for all of your support. At this time, we're going to pass around buckets. We appreciate all the financial support that you can also give. If you didn't bring any money, you can always go on to sfldg.org/donate. This helps to keep, to bring food, to also help to make sure that we bring more programming to you on a consistent basis. And also, I will say, we're always open to new topics, new ideas. Donald is always saying, what else can we do? How else can we provide the kind of programming that you would like to see? So if you have questions, please email me, chairman@sfldg.org, or programs@sfldg.org. Let us know what you want to hear. Let us know if you have, I'd love to hear about this topic, or I think this is a person would be great to talk to. Let us know. I'm going to turn it over to Donald. Donald, do you want to tell us what's coming up in the next few weeks?
Yes. So next month we have our very own Blade. Yes. And the most highly esteemed Frank Stroner talking about mindfucks. They're inviting you to bring stuff, just whatever you have.
What you would normally see as a non-sexual prop, and we'll twist it.
Right, so some household object that you wouldn't normally use in sex, and they will find a way of using it.
Real?
So don't miss that. Tell your friends. Then in June we're going to have Paul Johnson, who used to direct the Rough Line for Titan, and is now a kinky sex coach, and he once described that to me as a kind of penance for misleading everyone in the porn as to what kinky sex looked and felt like. So he's going to be talking about that. We're still nailing down who the performer is going to be to speak from that side of things on that, and then in July we're going to have an awesome, filthy live fisting show with some chat with the performers afterwards. So you definitely go So, without further ado, let's get stuck back into it with the ONYX boys.
I need to be here.
It's going to be over Dory Alley week, so you should.
I'll be here.
It's kind of tough. So, I want to lean in a little bit, and I know someone who had someone he occasionally played with in a race play scene, and I think it became a sort of thing after the scene where they would go out for dinner, and the person I'm thinking of would fall over himself, hoping to make sure that his play partner understood he was respected and valued. To the point where I think the guy was like, I get it, and to your point, Danny, about the being very careful around the flogging scene, about understanding, how it looks and how it feels and all the rest of it. There's got to be a balance, I guess, between, taking the care and going so far as to it being unsexy, whatever it is that's going on. Can you guys speak to that?
And I'm choosing him because literally about a month ago, we had the same discussion at Leather Leadership Conference in Atlanta. And this came up about race play, because, especially in the Deep South, they still believe in certain things, you know what I'm saying? So, Raylan told us a very good story.
Well, it's kind of funny because, my boy just got here and he said, so have you told him a Dory story yet? There's always a Midori story. From my point of view, and this, it differs from person to person. When I think of race play, I think of it historically. So, I think if I'm the slave or the sub in a race play scene, what's going through my head has absolutely nothing to do with the top. So, if it's a good scene for me and I'm on a cross of whatever, I'm thinking of this movie Mandingo. Did anyone ever see that movie? I know. Oh, you don't want to admit it, I know. But it's okay, I saw it too. So I'm thinking of the movie Mandingo. And there's a scene in that movie where me, the slave, is on a stage and they're going to auction him off. And all these people are coming up and they're picking at him and prodding him. And he stands there very strong, very proud, and to me was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen, because I was probably 10 or 12 when that came out, and I saw a big, buff, naked black man on a stage. Yes, they were auctioning him off, but it was really, really sexy to me. So when I'm in a scene and race play is going on in my head, I'm thinking that I'm big, I'm strong, I'm black, I'm invincible, I can overcome anything. And I can do that without the top knowing anything at all about it. The top to me at that point is a toy. He's there to make my scene go well. So I did that scene with Midori in public. And she started off, okay, some people are gonna be aghast. I know, okay. She started off by dropping cotton balls on the floor.
Oh my God.
I knew it.
You just asked that.
Yeah, and some of you may know Tobin up north.
Tobin.
Yes, so she had Tobin and I linked together with collars. My collar and chain was around my balls, and it was tied to Tobin's neck. So we had to move together. So in this scene in a public dungeon in Dallas, Midori dumped a bag of cotton balls all over the floor and told us to pick them up. So Tobin and I got on the floor and picked them up. We crawled around and picked them up.
I don't remember this part.
He's adding some extra sugar to this. You know.
It's a Midori thing. You know, it's like a Midori. That's what it is. So once we got into the dungeon, Midori had someone there dressed as an overseer, who had on one of those long slicker coats, the big hat, and he was from Georgia, and he had the accent. So he was saying what was going on between me and Tobin. And he'd say, hit that nigga harder, Midori. And she hit us harder. And Midori had on a hoop skirt. I forgot this part. Midori had on a hoop skirt, and she had on a wig with the little curls. And I know. So Midori was doing the scene. In my head, I was Mead on that stage being sold and beaten. And it was working for me because in my head, I was a big, proud, strong, beautiful slave, and I couldn't be broken. And to make it even better, me being tied to Tobin meant I had to take care of Tobin. I saw myself then as the caretaker. So all while this is going on, I'm talking to Tobin going, it's okay, I'll take care of you. And Midori beat us both, and that was our scene. And at the end of the scene, everyone who complained about it was white. Which is interesting to me because like I said in the beginning, we don't need rescuing. If I'm doing the scene and Midori's doing the scene and Tobin's doing the scene, clearly we have talked about this. So when I do a race play scene, it always, always, always has a historical element to it. Because that's how I connect to my homeland, that's how I connect to being black, that's how I connect to being of African descent. I can never relive what my ancestors did. But through BDSM and play like that, I can transport myself back to that. And that's how I do race play. I don't do it modernly. I do not get into some white guy telling me that, you know, he wants me to do a nigga's revenge scene from a movie with him. I don't do that. I don't believe it. It's not real to me. No one can ever believe that I'm going to be some thug guy walking down the street. You just don't see it in me. So all of my race play is historical, and it works for me that way. And it's a Midori story. So
I have nothing to say on that. Because I don't do race play, so I can't speak on that. Anyone else have to say anything?
Were you just conferring on something you wanted to share, or?
I just asked Trey to top me in a similar scene, except he would force me to pick up Q-tips.
Do you have particular
With my
types of
ear.
ears?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I don't know, but I'm assuming that on the journey you've had with ONYX, there was maybe some kind of sea change that you noticed when Obama became president in terms of, you know, expectations of what people of colour could achieve and do. Am I wrong? I mean, the follow-on, the obvious follow-on is current situation.
Oh, with Trump, So, when Obama got in office, I don't think there was an uptick in joining ONYX per se.
Right.
Actually, I think it kind of went up a little. The interest became more intense when the campaign of Trump and him getting elected, because we were like, this motherfucker got this motherfucker in office. And we all know what he's been saying and shit like that. So, I mean, I think taking out of the political, out of all this, ONYX just really grew because, again, what I mentioned earlier, it's just that perfect storm. And it's just, I think, and I'm just happy as a black man, a lot of black men are finally just on the foundation level, just accepting the fact that they are gay or bisexual. Because, you know, most of us coming from a heavily religious background, and, you know, if you're saying you're homosexual, you're going to go hell, Sodom and Gomorrah, all this shit. Yeah, they trying to fuck you after church, you know what I'm saying? But that's what I'm so we had to deal with that. So now you get more, black men saying, I'm just getting into my sexuality, my sexual preference and stuff. Now it's like realizing like, oh, maybe when I did get pissed on, that was kind of kinky. Or when someone spanked me, or maybe I'm not into choking or birth control, but got choked me when I was getting fucked. I said, well, yeah. I said, yeah, baby, that's BDSM. They're like, oh, shit, yeah. So, and this, for me, I guess that's why I'm called Daddy Rod. I get into, like, daddy mode. I get into the education mode. Because, to me, it's like, let me strike the iron while it's hot. Because now that shows me they have an interest. So, depending on what part of the country they're at, it's like, well, we have a chapter here, we have a chapter here. So, if I can't personally beat you, whatever I want to do, I can at least refer you to somebody else who will. But, or at least educate you, in a serious sense, educate you, because again, a lot of them now are really interested in knowing what's, just, I guess what we said earlier, this is just not a white thing. We're not to this white boy shit. Yes, black men, Latino men, Asian men, Arab men, we get into this too. And it doesn't mean, because there's a word in the black community for those who, some black men, when we deal with white men, call them snow queens. It's like, we're not all snow queens. So it's like, if you want to deal specifically with black men or other men of color, we are here for that. Now, we tell people honestly, like, look, because I'm a part of, for those who don't know, I'm actually the founder of the Atlanta BDSM workshops, which is going on now 3 years now. Did anyone know Sir Alan Finley? Yeah. Okay, so, the little history on that. There was a group called ASS, which meant Atlanta Solidarity and SFM, which folded in 2012. They used to have an educational workshop in Atlanta going every third Wednesday. It folded when the organization folded. So Sir Alan and I waited about a year or two to kind of let things calm down, and we restarted the group because we both felt it was essential to be better Kingsters. We need to be educated Kingsters. So by doing that, I kind of put myself out there because my thing is I ran into all these men of color who was dying for this information, but they were a little bit uncomfortable going to a white man or a white woman because the issues they dealt with just going to the regular club, being objectified and fetishized. So me being there, putting my face out there would give them that kind of like that. Like I can talk to him, but then at the same time I said I had to let them know, like, look, yes, because most of our class is still predominantly white, and that's fine by me. I have no problem with that. But I had to let my brothers and sisters know, like, education from a white person or Asian man is just as good as it came from a black person. It's like, if you're into, like, let's say, for instance, sounding, God forbid, I'm not into that. But let's say, for instance, you love sounding and you're teaching it, I'm going to refer him to you. You see what I'm saying? So I was like, you gotta learn to accept education from everybody. Because I tell people, black people in a heartbeat, Lord, in the name of Jesus, not every black person is your friend, and not every white person is your enemy. So I was like, let's be realistic. I said, look at Clarence Thomas, he ain't our friend. So I'm like, hey, let's get a grip here. So, and by doing that, and I think, and you know as well as I do, networking is key. You never know who's gonna be your friend to kind of bring you out and to be shared. Because when I was a little babe in leather, I was like, I ain't doing all that shit. Now I do almost every damn thing. But by being exposed to everybody, women, because at first I didn't think I could ever play with a woman. But when I did the spanking thing with a woman, I was like, this shit is good. So, but for a lot of men, they was like, I can't play with a woman because they're so used to just fucking a man. But I said, you gotta understand, not all sex is penetration or oral. So a lot of it's all very mental as well. Because for a lot of black men, they're not used to this. So it's like, we're almost like, in a way, unofficial psychologists and psychotherapists and every damn thing else. It's the truth. I mean, I have my little psychotherapies in the side. I'm like, God, I need to be paying for this shit. But I was like, I'm not Dr. Phil or Inyama Van Zant, but
also, too, is like black men and growing up, and so you're not allowed to be comfortable with your sexuality at all. Like you're either this or that. That's you go to work, you do what you're supposed to do. You can't make yourself look too like vulnerable or be too out there, because then you'll appear weak. And we have literally, black men have like our communities on our backs. Like, hey, you have to be the representation for the entire black community when you come to when you're representing for, especially like with white people. It's like that's what it is, and that's what we grow up with. And so when you say finally, okay, we're allowed to, you know, explore sexuality, and seeing another black man exploring sexuality, you're like, okay, wait, maybe I can do this, and maybe it's not weird, and you know, I'm allowed to be who I am, you know, finally. And I think that's like finally something that we're allowed to do, just be who we are, you know.
You know, we've talked a lot about being visible and stuff, but black men especially, at least my generation, were taught to be invisible, because if you step out of line, if you are noticed, there's a chance that you could be killed, you could be lynched. All these things were very real, because I was born in Alabama in 1960. So I had that playing in my head a lot growing up. Don't be seen, because that could be the end of your life. So then to come out as gay is one thing, then to be a Leatherman is another thing, and then to be seen as a Leatherman is just really propelling you out there. And a lot of black men are just not used to that or comfortable with that. It's much easier to be invisible, because that's what we were taught to be growing up.
No, I think it's just interesting the way that men of color are either desexualized or demonized for their sexuality. Like, you know, so obviously, like, you don't see a lot of Asian representation in American sexual media, for example, because we're desexualized and we're taught to that audiences should think of us as asexual or not a threat. And then when I'm hearing you guys talk, I'm also thinking about within a lot of black communities, men are either taught that if you make yourself too big, you open yourself up to harm. And at the same time, there's this other double-edged sword where it's like, we also in American history have a legacy of demonizing black male sexuality too. Like, case in point, we have like in the film Birth of a Nation, like literally the triggering event is a black guy raping a woman, or like attempting to rape a white woman. And that's one of the reasons why the Ku Klux Klan even started to begin with, which was like the protection of white female Christian sovereignty against the brutality of blackness, right? And like we have a history of let's lynch this young man because we heard he catcalled out a white woman, right? And so I think it's really interesting to move. And then also, I mean, let's bring it back to Trump. He fucking said like brown people, like Mexicans are rapists, right? Like I think it's just really interesting, this kind of realm that we exist in, which the way that the optics of our sexuality is being projected in mass media, and then the way that we're trying to reclimate it as kinksters who are trying to actively not just practice our sexuality, but also like practice it to certain extremes, where the optics also like look very questionable to outside audiences. Right? So that is all. That is the thought. I had no answer.
To kind of go back to
You asked me what I was thinking, so. Sure.
To go back to the original, I actually just had a conversation with somebody about the current political situation and why they wanted to join, possibly join ONYX. And they had told me like, yeah, I moved here from like the East Coast, and I heard of ONYX a while back, but never was like all that interested. And then I moved out here, and I'm really interested. And I was like, well, why didn't you want to join out there? I was like, well, when I heard about it, Obama was in office, and I felt like I could be me anywhere, and I didn't need the backup. Now I feel like I need brothers behind me consistently because I need to feel safe.
Right.
And I was just like, that's a good reason. Like it's like I completely understand that.
Yeah.
But I feel like that that might have, yeah. And that has a lot to do with where we're at right now.
Right. I'm conscious of the time, and I would like to open it up to the audience. I know there's at least one person over here who has a question, and some more over there. So,
Sure. My question actually was for Danny. My first 10 years of hearing about ONYX, I had the misconception that it was a black men's organization, and I'm wondering, as you know, a minority in a minority group, if that's a wrong phrasing, but like, is there like official channels of like, is there like a Asian or Pacific Islander like caucus, or like, do you find that same kind of finding people with that shared experience that like Rod talked about as a black man, and being able to like understand like what happens with the black church and things like that? And I'm wondering what your experience is like as a non-black POC member of ONYX.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, well, when I joined ONYX, I understand that perception, but I also, I guess when I joined, I was also like, it ain't black anymore. No, I also looked at like the LA chapter, and it's like, how was I freaking black and brown and blue and all everything? Right. It's like I also recognize things in terms of like regionality is also gonna right. It's gonna affect like where our ethnic enclaves exist, right? That's gonna affect membership and your ability to recruit accordingly, right? So, but it's actually interesting. Most of the work that I do within like educating and mentoring other Asian, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiian like people, particularly here in the Bay Area, I do it within the Asian American queer community rather than within the kink community, and it's probably because a lot of Asians also. I used to work at the API Wellness Center, and then I actually currently work for a nonprofit called the Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum. I probably ruined their branding, so sorry, work. So I do interact with a lot of queer API folks, and what's interesting is when I do interface with them, I remember when I first taught like BDSM workshops with them, at the Wellness Center or something like that. The reactions I got was like, "Isn't that a white thing? Isn't that also, oddly enough, they're also like, isn't that also just for bears?" Which I thought was funny. But they don't feel. They actually ask me like, are we even welcomed in leather bars? Like, are we like? I once went into the powerhouse and like I got really weird stares, and so I just left. Or just like I get a lot of feedback about API folks like unwilling or feeling made to feel uncomfortable to come to leather events, or they have had negative experiences having come to leather events. And so their response is, I would rather just either not put myself at risk of being emotionally damaged or like face hostility and not explore my sexuality in that direction, or I'd rather just only find these really random limited opportunities that exist within like the Asian queer community. So I think that's something that I've been trying to actively work around, but it's a challenge. It will continue to be. But so that's why I think I find more success in interpersonal connections and trying to build folks up so that they feel more confident, like they can come in.
I'm just grateful that ONYX exists, and I've been in a group like this for a very long time. Living in the Bay Area can feel very isolating being a person of color. So I'm very thankful and grateful that I've met them. I think there's two thoughts about this discussion, and just even being in the room and whatnot, is that the question I would like to ask everyone that's here, how this evening did you go to somebody that you didn't know and actually start talking with them, and actually just kind of get to know them a little bit? Part of the reason why I asked that is because at least looking around, this is not to be like, ooh, I'm calling it right now. It's more so just like, if we want to actually make a community more inclusive, then we actively need to be doing some regular thinking about how do we do that. And there are people here that I've seen that were people of color that were sitting around and no one was really talking to them during the break. And I went and started talking to some people. I'm just thinking about like, how can we actively, like I think one of the questions earlier, just like how do we make it more of an inclusive space? And I think just thinking about that, for instance, because I only mainly, before I started going up to people that I didn't know, I was mainly talking to people that I knew, and I understand that sometimes it's just a comfortable thing of doing that. But if we want to really model like having a place in spaces, and we should be thinking in that way. I think also there's another thing I was thinking about with like, again, for Mr. S and just some of the modeling. I mean, I'm sure there's probably half the panel, if not the whole panel, that would easily be willing to do some modeling. But I think, so there's that, but I think also, it really does matter about image to a certain point, because it's like, being, when I was a Gaten, and being out and walking around the Castro, and all the flyers, or even walking around and seeing the flyers in Soma, and not seeing anyone that looks like me. It hurts your soul at a certain point, and you don't think that you can be accepted, and you can be seen. And I think it's something about like, what can we do? Like there's this magazine that I think was like Vanity Fair, and it was nothing but, it was talking about the Me Too movement, it was nothing but white women that were undercover, and not one of them, it wasn't until they got pretty much, people started talking about it, it's like, why aren't the 6 of you talking about why do we all look the same? And this is a movement that was started by a black woman. So I think there's just things like that, that when there are photo shoots or whatnot, the people that are also a part of those photo shoots and being shot, taking a look around and going, why is it like this? What can we actually do? And I just kind of want to think about that a little bit more, and just other people's ideas about what can we actually actively do around inclusion. That's
Thank you.
You know, if I could address that a little bit. Again, most of you know me, and I've been around here for a while, and I've done a number of photo shoots, like the Folsom Street poster and all that kind of stuff. And I'm always aware that I'm the only black guy there. However, it would also be insulting for there to be a black guy, a Latino guy, an Asian guy, a trans woman, you know, so you also have to be careful that you aren't tokenizing the whole thing. Looking at that and being a black guy here who's been here for a while, pretty much any poster that comes out has either me, Lance, Race Cooper, or my little brother Jamal over here on the poster. We're like the go-to black guys. You know, we need a black guy, we get him. And we're very aware of that at all times. So what I'm left with is, do I bring this up to the producers and say, we need more black guys, or we need more people of color on this poster? Or should I be happy that we at least have one?
Both.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, you know, where do you draw the line? So, I mean, it is a complicated thing to do, you know. Yes, I'm happy we're on the poster, but there's more people of color here than the 4 of us. I mean, look at this panel here, you know. So it is kind of a tricky thing.
Yeah, so I work in the field of HIV, and we're very much aware that hits communities of color, you know, in a much more disproportionate way. And so, and part of what I'm doing is trying to do programming for trainings for providers, and we're always very, very conscious of trying to make sure that when we're recruiting speakers, that we are having speakers that are representing the people that we are, you know, hoping to reach. And I was just thinking about, like, when we're putting planning committee members together, we always want to make sure representation is there within the group, that it's not us planning for people of color, but it's people of color who have a voice and direct that. So I think, you know, making sure that you have a seat at the table, I think is maybe what I kept hearing from you, you know, in terms of the marketing. And I was thinking, like, wouldn't it be amazing if ONYX did a whole distress, you know, email, like it was just all ONYX, like, or what if, you know, let's do something radical, like is there a poster where it's like, you know, all men of color? I mean, if one person is feeling awkward about stepping up and being the only one, what about going and saying, hey, let's, you know, a couple times trying to make sure that everybody, you know, is included as a person of color. And I'm just interested in what your thoughts on something.
Can't have too many black people on a poster.
I mean, how
Seriously,
I mean,
it's
that's
threatening.
yeah.
It's threatening to the rest of America to have 2 or 3 people of color on the poster. Or in the same, I worked at Great America for growing up, and I was in the show there. There were 3 black guys in that show, but only 2 of us could be on the stage at the same time because it was threatening to people.
Not only that too, I think when you have, let's say you did do an all black poster, it would be considered to be a black thing. And there, nobody else, they'd be like, okay, well, we're not supposed to be there because it's black people. And if you get too many, and we already know that.
Yeah,
We can't.
we're very, very aware.
Yeah.
I mean, just Mr. S alone, I'm like, I make the shit. I don't need to be on the poster. I'm fine. I do enough here. But in general, like I've felt like when I have gone to modeling shoots or when I go to panels, which I've done for most of my life, either around sexuality or any other particular thing, I'm very aware why they're bringing me on. And then to the point where I've had photographers or people running panels say, well, we brought you so we could knock two things off of the list. Because I'm not only a person of color, I'm also trans. So they're just kind of like, we're just getting all the diversity out. Exactly. Like, for a long time, I worked with one organization, and they would just be like, the person who said this consistently, I never really stood up to saying anything to them because I was very young at the time and did not know how to have this conversation with someone that was technically above me in an organization. They're like, oh no, we brought the token. I was literally the token in everything. And I knew that, and I was aware of it, and I laughed at it at the time because I did not know what else to do. But like, I also, while feeling really sort of like weird and like not okay with it, I'm also like, at least you're trying to get enough voices in the same room. Like, I'm trying to like pick my battles with that because I'd rather have me up there or someone like me who can have that conversation and have enough people to have it than not have anybody there at all. So I'm never sure, like, if I go into a room and I'm the only person there of any of that, if that's why I'm there, or because as far as like, besides this panel, I've really been one of the only people that I show up and I'm either of those things. So like, it'd be nice to have a whole panel of people like this, or have more than just one, but I've literally never seen it.
So we'll go to race.
It's actually in line with what people say. I happen to believe that subculture is very imagery focused, more so than most. And I feel presence and imagery matters. We've talked about that. Has ONYX ever considered approaching every producer, every retailer, every bar, and very politely say, we would strongly encourage you to consider having people of color in your marketing? Just a polite ask. I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We have not officially thought of that and done that kind of approaching. Though I do want to respond directly to that question by tying in what was being brought up earlier, which is, what is your name again? Sorry.
Duran.
He's a planet.
He's a planet.
Awesome. I haven't met you yet, so hi. I think it's really important that when we look at posters, that the optics of it, right, is like when you're walking around the Castro or the Soma and you're seeing this is a hot white model. What is also being said is also in the parenthetical, which is what is not in this photo is not hot, right? Is not attractive. And I think, yes, it is really important that leaders within like POC movements go about advocating, but I also think that it is up to the rest of the community, the greater community, to advocate on our behalf. I think it is really important. Yeah, we can go ahead and tell them, yeah, we want it, but I don't think that's going to put the community pressure unless if everybody else in this room is also implicating the the people who are holding power and the decision makers at that level and pressuring them to do that, to go about and doing the hard work of recruiting, of actively trying to find models, of trying to actually find representatives, and going about the hard work of doing this networking, especially considering that you are now working against a system where some folks just don't want to be tokenized at the same time. But I think, it's up to white folks to also advocate on our behalf.
So I'm afraid I've left a little bit late to get on to some vital questions so that we can wrap up, which are, so sorry Blade and others if you had questions. If Le Guan were here and maybe Trey is the person to speak to this as Vice President, next steps for ONYX?
Next steps, well, we just finished our, we didn't finish, but we just started our new pledge class. We have a couple pledges, so we're excited about that. That's like our next thing to get everybody crossing over soon. And just like being a lot more outreach. We're trying to get ourselves visible and in every space and know that we're here and we are in the Bay Area. We're trying to do big things. Anybody else?
Well, I'd like to have our pledges acknowledged that are in the room. Can y'all stand?
Christian.
To answer his question also, you got to realize ONYX Northwest not only encompasses the Bay Area, but also Oregon and Washington. So we're still very in the early stage, but we're also working to go to San Jose, Sacramento, Reno, and we have actually perspectives who live in Seattle and Portland who want to be part of ONYX as well. So it's just trying to plan events up there to do recruiting, just put a face up there because some people were at IMSO last week, people came from Portland and Seattle. I was like, when is ONYX coming up here? When is ONYX coming up here? So it's a lot of stuff that we're still working on. I'm mentoring them out. Because they're still new, and I love them too.
They're very new.
So, but just really trying to market themselves out there, really trying to plan trips, because I understand people's work schedules, budgets to fly up north and stuff, but a lot of stuff going on. And just to also piggyback, to call on your comment, one thing I stressed to them earlier on, we really tried to work with people of color organizations, not only in Oakland, but San Jose and Sacramento, because Joe Hawkins, who's a club producer in Oakland, just recently opened the first gay and lesbian center in Oakland. So trying to work with them as well.
So just kind of
also, you guys should come out on Saturday.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Every fourth Saturday.
Every fourth
Come on, y'all
Saturday.
probably bar night.
This Saturday.
Every fourth Friday.
Yeah.
Saturday.
Which is sorry. Every fourth Saturday, which is this Saturday. We host an event at the Powerhouse, and you guys should all come.
And we're actually officially introducing all of our pledges, so it's more than just the three they see here. So
6 to 9 at the Powerhouse this Saturday, and it's every fourth Saturday. So for those who are not going to IML, we will be at the Powerhouse from 6 to 9 Memorial Day weekend to cheer on our San Francisco crew from the Powerhouse. So come there also that weekend and help us cheer our
And
San
thanks
Francisco
to
guys
Scott
out.
with the Powerhouse for opening up to us to host us. They've been great since the beginning because they allowed us to do the Folsom Street party 2 years ago. It's been a popular success. And now we're going to have our first Dory Alley party this year, so we're excited. So it's all good.
And if people want to join ONYX, what do they do?
they go to our website. It's
ONYX Northwest.
ONYXNorthwest.com, and there's application information, and also you can email us. It's ONYX NCA NW@gmail. Also, we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So
ONYX Northwest.
ONYX Northwest.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'd like to give you guys to give the. Thank you very much for joining us. Come back next month, and when you